There were 350 people in that studio, but when that woman stood up in the audience, the world stopped spinning. The cameras were rolling, the lights were bright and warm, casting their familiar glow across the stage where Oprah Winfrey sat across from one of the most celebrated authors of her generation. Everything was perfect. The interview was going exactly as planned. The audience was captivated, hanging on every word. Until a woman in the third row rose to her feet. She was in her late 70s, gray hair pulled back in a simple bun, hands trembling as she clutched a worn shoebox against her chest. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, tears streaming down her wrinkled face, staring at the woman on stage. The author's voice stopped mid-sentence. Her face went pale. Her hands gripped the armrests of her chair so tightly, her knuckles turned white. And in that moment, 350 people witnessed something that would become one of the most emotional moments in television history. A daughter seeing her mother for the first time in 35 years. A mother who had abandoned her as an infant. A shoebox filled with letters that were never sent. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Her name was Caroline Marshall, 53 years old, a best-selling author with 12 novels to her name, each one translated into 40 languages, each one touching millions of readers around the world. Critics called her the voice of the abandoned, the poet of the forgotten, the writer who understood loneliness better than anyone alive. They had no idea how right they were. Oprah had been preparing for this interview for weeks. She had read all 12 of Caroline's novels. She had studied every interview, every speech, every rare glimpse into the private world of a woman who wrote about pain with such precision it felt like surgery. But there was one thing that had always puzzled Oprah. One detail that appeared in every single book Caroline had ever written. The dedication page. Every novel, without exception, carried the same 4 words: "To my unknown mother." Oprah had asked her about it in pre-interviews. Caroline had politely deflected. She had built walls around that part of her story so high and so thick that no journalist had ever broken through. Until today. The interview had started beautifully. Caroline spoke about her latest novel, a story about a woman searching for the mother who gave her up at birth. The audience was moved. Oprah was moved. The conversation flowed naturally, touching on craft, inspiration, the healing power of storytelling. Then, Oprah asked the question she had been building toward all afternoon. "Caroline, every book you've ever written is dedicated to your unknown mother. 12 books, 12 dedications, 40 years of writing, and yet you've never spoken publicly about her." Oprah paused, her voice gentle but direct. "Why?" But Caroline's smile faded. She looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. For a long moment, she didn't speak. The studio held its breath. "Because I don't know her," Caroline finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was left at a fire station in Detroit when I was 3 days old. No note, no name, nothing but a blanket and a stuffed rabbit." She looked up at Oprah, and there was something in her eyes that made the audience lean forward. Not sadness, something rawer, something unresolved. "I spent my entire childhood in the foster system. 11 homes in 16 years. Some were good, most were not." She paused. "I started writing when I was 9 years old. Little stories at first, then longer ones. I wrote because it was the only way I could talk to her." "To your mother?" Oprah asked softly. Caroline nodded. "Every book I've ever written is a letter to the woman who left me. Every character searching for home. Every story about belonging and loss and finding your way back. It's all for her." Her voice cracked slightly. "I've spent 40 years writing to a woman I've never met, asking the same question over and over." "What question?" Caroline's eyes glistened. "Why wasn't I enough? The audience was silent. Some people were already crying. Oprah felt her own chest tighten. "Have you ever tried to find her?" Oprah asked. "I did, once, when I was 25. Caroline took a deep breath. "I hired a private investigator. He found her. She was living in a small town in Ohio. He gave me her address, her phone number, everything I needed." "What happened?" "I stood outside her house for 3 hours. I watched her through the window, watering plants, making dinner. She looked so ordinary, so peaceful." Caroline's voice hardened slightly. "And I realized I didn't want to disrupt that peace. I didn't want to be the ghost that walked into her life and reminded her of the worst decision she ever made." She looked directly at Oprah. "So I left, and I never went back." The studio was completely still. Oprah reached across and touched Caroline's hand. "Do you regret that choice?" Caroline was quiet for a long moment. "Every single day." And that's when it happened. A movement in the audience. A woman standing up, slowly, unsteadily, like her legs might give out beneath her. "What happens next will stay with you long after this story ends. Share it now." Caroline saw her first. Her entire body went rigid. The color drained from her face so quickly that Oprah thought she might faint. "Caroline?" Oprah said, following her gaze. "What's wrong?" But Caroline couldn't speak. She was staring at the woman in the third row like she was seeing a ghost. Because in a way, she was. The woman was 76 years old. Her name was Eleanor Price. And she was the woman who had left a 3-day-old baby at a Detroit fire station 53 years ago. Oprah's producers had found her 6 months earlier. They had approached her carefully, gently explaining that Caroline had become one of the most beloved authors in the world, explaining that every book she had ever written was dedicated to her. Eleanor had broken down completely. She had sobbed for 2 hours straight, and then she had shown them something she had kept hidden for over 5 decades. A shoebox, filled with letters, hundreds of them, one for every month since the day she gave up her daughter. Letters she had written but never sent. Letters addressed to a daughter whose name she never knew. Now Eleanor stood in the audience, clutching that shoebox against her chest, tears streaming down her face, unable to move forward or back. Oprah rose from her chair. She walked to the edge of the stage and extended her hand. "Ma'am," Oprah said softly, "would you come up here, please?" Eleanor's legs were shaking. A production assistant appeared beside her, gently guiding her toward the stage. Step by step, she climbed toward the daughter she had abandoned half a century ago. Caroline hadn't moved. She sat frozen in her chair, her hands gripping the armrests, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She looked like a woman watching her entire life restructure itself in real time. When Eleanor finally reached the stage, she stopped a few feet away from Caroline. Mother and daughter, face to face for the first time in 53 years. Neither spoke. Oprah stepped between them gently. She had witnessed reunions before. She had seen joy and anger and confusion and relief. But she had never felt tension quite like this. The air itself seemed to vibrate with decades of unspoken words. "Caroline," Oprah said quietly, "this is Eleanor. She has something she wants to give you." Eleanor extended the shoebox with trembling hands. "I wrote to you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Every month, for 53 years. I wrote to you and I never sent them because I didn't know where you were. I didn't know your name. I didn't know if you were alive or dead or happy or hurting." Caroline stared at the box. She didn't take it. "Why?" The word came out sharp, broken. "Why did you leave me?" Eleanor's face crumpled. 53 years of guilt and grief and shame poured out in a single exhale. "I was 17, she said. "I was alone. I was terrified. My parents threw me out when they found out I was pregnant. I had no money, no home, no one who would help me." The tears fell freely now. "I didn't leave you because I didn't want you. I left you because I wanted you to have a chance I couldn't give you." She took a shaky step closer. "I have watched you from a distance your entire life. I read your first book sitting in a library in Ohio, and I cried so hard they asked me to leave. I have read every word you've ever written, every single dedication that asked why you weren't enough." Eleanor's voice shattered completely. "You were always enough. You were more than enough. I was the one who wasn't enough. I was the one who failed you." Caroline's armor cracked, her face contorted with 40 years of grief rushing to the surface all at once. A sound escaped her throat, something between a sob and a scream, the sound of a little girl who had waited her entire life to hear those words. She stood up. She crossed the space between them, and for the first time in 53 years, mother and daughter held each other. The audience wept openly. Camera operators wiped their eyes. Oprah stood to the side, her hand pressed against her heart, tears streaming down her face. Oprah had her own wounds, her own complicated relationship with motherhood and abandonment. Watching this reunion, she felt something ancient and personal stir in her own chest. The universal ache of every child who ever wondered if they were wanted. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Time had lost all meaning. Finally, Caroline pulled back. Her face was red, swollen, transformed. She looked at the shoebox still in Eleanor's hands. "You really wrote to me all those years?" Eleanor nodded. "Every single month." "Open it." Caroline took the box with trembling hands. She lifted the lid. Inside were hundreds of letters, yellowed with age, organized by year. She pulled one out at random. December 1989. Her eyes scanned the faded handwriting. Then she began to read aloud, her voice breaking on every word. "My darling girl, today you turned 18. I wonder if you had a cake. I wonder if someone sang to you. I sang to you alone in my kitchen this morning, the same song I hummed to you the 3 days I held you before I let you go. I hope you know that letting go was the hardest thing I ever did. I hope you know that I think of you every single day, and I hope, wherever you are, that someone is loving you the way I wish I could." Caroline's hands were shaking so badly the paper trembled. She looked up at her mother with an expression Oprah had never seen on anyone's face before. It was grief and joy and rage and forgiveness all existing in the same moment. "You knew about my first book," Caroline whispered. "You wrote about how proud you were." "I have never missed a single thing you've done," Eleanor said. "I just couldn't reach you. I didn't have the right." Oprah stepped forward. "Caroline, do you understand what's happening right now? This is your moment, the moment 40 years of letters finally reach their destination, both directions." Caroline looked at the shoebox, then at her mother, then at Oprah. "I spent my whole life writing to a woman I thought never loved me," she said slowly. "And she spent her whole life writing back." She turned to Eleanor. "Why didn't you come to a signing, a reading? Why didn't you find me after I became public?" Eleanor's face twisted with fresh pain. "Because I didn't deserve to. I gave up that right the day I left you at that fire station. I thought the kindest thing I could do was let you live your life without the burden of knowing me." Caroline was silent for a long moment. The studio held its breath. Then she said something that broke everyone watching. "You were wrong. I needed the burden. I needed you." She pulled Eleanor into her arms again. This time, when they held each other, something had shifted. The first embrace was shock. This one was choice. This one was forgiveness beginning its slow, sacred work. Oprah addressed the camera, her voice thick with emotion. "This is why we tell these stories, not for ratings, not for headlines, but for moments like this, when two people finally find words for wounds that have been silent for decades." 8 months later, Oprah received a package. Inside was a hardcover book, Caroline's 13th novel. On the cover, a mother and daughter holding hands, walking toward a house with lights in the windows. Oprah turned to the dedication page. To Eleanor, my mother, my reader, my first audience. It took us 53 years, but we finally found our way home. Tucked inside the book was a photograph. Caroline and Eleanor sitting on a porch swing, heads tilted toward each other, laughing at something off camera. On the back, Caroline had written, "She moved in with me last spring. We read the letters together, every single one. Thank you for giving her back to me." Oprah placed that photograph on her shelf, because television was never about the lights or the cameras. It was about this, the letters that were never sent, the words that finally found their way home, the daughter who learned she had always been enough, and the mother who finally got to say it out loud. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Some words take decades to arrive. Some letters never get sent. But love has a way of finding its destination, even when we think it's lost forever. That's the legacy of that afternoon. A shoebox filled with 53 years of longing, and two women who finally stopped writing to each other from a distance. Because sometimes the bravest thing we can do is not protect someone from our presence. It's showing up. Even when we think we don't deserve to. For Eleanor, for Caroline, for every mother and child still searching for each other.